For our next task, we're going to be creating a narrative for a gap in the text, specifically looking at the experience of perhaps a minor character. So in this case, in Jane Eyre, we're going to look at the character Georgiana, Jane Eyre's cousin. We first meet Georgiana in chapter 2, where she's described in this sentence. Then you'll need to look at chapter 21, when Jane returns to Gateshead after her time at Thornfield. We've read how Mr. Rochester has grown fond of Jane and that Bertha Mason is up in the attic howling away, and at a critical moment in the text where it appears as though Mr. Rochester is going to propose to Blanche Ingram, and he hints to Jane that his affections lie deeply for someone, though he doesn't specify who, Jane Eyre is called back to Gateshead to visit her aunt. Now what I'd like you to do is read through this section, and you'll notice that I've highlighted in yellow the parts where there are descriptions of Jane Eyre and Georgiana's relationship and Jane Eyre's observations of Georgiana. Now if you read through all of this, and this document will be sent to you and you will have a hard copy, you're then going to be at the very end be asked what adjectives in the text reveal Jane Eyre's observations of Georgiana. You're going to be asked here to read again what Jane Eyre observes and learns about from her cousin, which will serve her later in her relationship with Mr. Rochester. I want you to answer this question: what does Georgiana want? And then question 5 gives the context of the family situation that would justify her behaviour. And then I want you to think, okay, based on all that information, I'm going to tell a story in that gap in the narrative. So if I read this, we find out that Georgiana did suspect there was going to be a proposal from Lord Edwin Vere, but Eliza stands in the way. So read that section and then decide, what was it that Eliza did? It says in the text what she might have done, but we're not quite sure. So in third person, I would like you to plan the possible storyline that led to Edwin Vere not proposing or not embarking on some sort of relationship with Georgiana, and what did Eliza do within it. So you need to establish where it's set. With setting, try to avoid having a number of settings and have one setting. Perhaps it's outside at a ball, or at a tea time, or perhaps Edwin has been invited to Gateshead and he's in the parlour. And purely set your interaction in that one setting. Remember, the setting can be symbolic, so it can be claustrophobic, it can be out in the open, and those can have symbolic purposes in your short story. Then I'd like you to note as you go up a triangle, so this is a typical short story structure, up the triangle, what complications in point form would lead to whatever you decide the climax is going to be. Is the climax going to be some sort of revelation from Eliza? Is it going to be Edwin rejecting Georgiana? Is it Georgiana doing something that turns Edwin off? And then I'd like you to reach a resolution. So perhaps if it's set in London, there's the return to Gateshead, which is actually in the text. There's no attachment, and there's a spiteful relationship between Georgiana and Eliza. Remember, when you're writing a short story, so you start off with characters and setting here, you have a series of relevant complications that arrive at a climax, and then you have points to the ending or resolution. That's a typical short story structure. We'll look at other story structures at another time. But in the middle here, I have the theme, because the beginning and the end need to be tied together, so there's some sort of purpose underpinning your storytelling. So here's a possible theme. You may change it if you wish. They who are vain and passionate will not secure love. Now the reason I've chosen that theme is at this point in the text, when Jane Eyre returns to Gateshead, she has been observing Blanche Ingram and her inability to charm Mr. Rochester. And Mr. Rochester, observing Blanche Ingram's vanity and her cruelty to Adele, for example, is not going to pursue a relationship with Blanche Ingram. Unfortunately, Jane Eyre doesn't know that. So on the sheet, I'd like you, once you've done the activity, to plot this out, as this will be the process that you will follow for your assessment.